The most feared man in the city was about to risk everything for a lie. Not because he wanted love, not because he needed companionship, but because one dinner could decide the future of his empire. And the woman he hired to play his wife for a single night was about to change everything. For years, Alessandro Moretti had built a reputation that made powerful men lower their voices when his name was mentioned. Business leaders respected him. Rivals feared him. Politicians carefully chose their words around him. He controlled vast investments, luxury properties, and connections that stretched across the country. Yet tonight, none of that seemed enough. Standing inside the top floor of his downtown skyscraper, Alessandro stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city below. His trusted advisor, Victor, stood nearby with a worried expression. "The dinner starts in 3 hours," Victor reminded him. Alessandro remained silent. The gathering wasn't just another social event. Some of the most influential people in the country would be there. Investors, power brokers, international partners. And among them would be several rivals who had been searching for any sign of weakness. Unfortunately, Alessandro had recently given them one. For months, rumors had spread that he was isolated, distracted, and losing influence. Some questioned why a man of his status remained unmarried. Others whispered that he lacked the stability needed for several upcoming business alliances. The solution was simple, at least on paper. Appear at the dinner with a wife. A believable wife. A woman capable of convincing everyone that his personal life was as solid as his business empire. The problem was finding someone who could survive an evening under that level of scrutiny. Then, 2 days earlier, fate had introduced him to Emma Carter. Emma was nothing like the women who usually surrounded powerful men. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't famous. And she certainly wasn't intimidated by Alessandro Moretti. Their first meeting had lasted less than 15 minutes. Yet somehow she had challenged him more than most people dared in years. When he offered her the arrangement, she didn't immediately accept. Instead, she folded her arms and asked a question nobody else would have dared ask. "What's the catch?" Alessandro almost smiled remembering it. Most people focused on the money. Emma focused on the truth. Eventually, she agreed. One dinner, one role, one night pretending to be husband and wife. After that, they would go their separate ways. No complications, no emotions, no expectations. At least, that had been the plan. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Victor checked his phone and looked up. "She's here." For the first time that day, Alessandro felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. He walked toward the private elevator. The doors opened slowly. And the moment he saw Emma standing there, every carefully prepared thought disappeared. The confident woman stepping into the room looked nothing like the person he remembered from 2 days ago. Elegant, composed, radiating confidence. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. And somehow, that made her impossible to ignore. Emma met his gaze without hesitation. "Well?" she asked. Alessandro raised an eyebrow. "Well, what?" She smiled. "Do I look convincing enough to fool the most powerful people in the city?" For a rare moment, Alessandro Moretti struggled to find an answer. Because something told him the real problem wasn't whether she could fool them. The real problem was what would happen when everyone else noticed her too. And before the night was over, that concern would become the least of his worries. The drive to the dinner should have been simple. A fake husband, a fake wife, a few hours of convincing performances. Then they would walk away and never think about each other again. At least, that was what Alessandro kept telling himself. Yet as the black luxury sedan moved through the evening traffic, he found his attention drifting toward the woman seated beside him. Emma looked perfectly calm. Too calm. Most people entering a room filled with billionaires, politicians, and influential executives would be nervous. They would ask questions. They would seek reassurance. Emma was looking out the window, as if she were heading to an ordinary dinner. Alessandro finally broke the silence. "Do you remember the rules?" Without turning her head, she answered immediately. "Smile when necessary. Don't reveal personal information. Follow your lead. Avoid unnecessary conversations." "Good." She turned toward him with a small grin. "You forgot one." His eyes narrowed. "I did. Don't embarrass the powerful Mafia boss." Victor, sitting across from them, nearly laughed before catching himself. Alessandro shook his head. "You find this amusing." "I find you amusing." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Alessandro felt himself smiling. It disappeared almost instantly. But Emma noticed. Of course she noticed. Interesting, she said. What is? You actually can smile. Don't get used to it. Too late. Victor stared out the window, wisely pretending not to hear any of it. The vehicle eventually approached the Grand Meridian Hotel, one of the most exclusive venues in the city. Bright lights illuminated the entrance. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Photographers waited behind barriers. Security personnel stood at every access point. The moment the car stopped, Alessandro's expression hardened again. Business mode. Control. Precision. No mistakes. He stepped out first and offered Emma his hand. She accepted naturally. Not awkwardly. Not nervously. Naturally. That detail caught his attention. Many women had walked beside him before. Most seemed overwhelmed by the attention. Emma looked as though she belonged there. Camera flashes erupted the instant they appeared. Reporters began shouting questions. Mr. Moretti, who is the woman beside you? Is this your wife? Have you been secretly married? Alessandro expected Emma to freeze. Instead, she smiled politely and continued walking. Confident, elegant, unshaken. Inside the lobby, several influential guests immediately turned toward them. The reaction was impossible to miss. People weren't simply looking at Alessandro. They were looking at Emma. Whispers spread through the crowd. Questions followed. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had nobody heard of her before? Alessandro noticed something else. The attention wasn't fading. It was growing. An elderly business magnate approached first. Alessandro, he said warmly before turning to Emma. And who is this remarkable young woman? Before Alessandro could answer, Emma extended her hand. Emma Carter. It's a pleasure to meet you. The man smiled instantly. Within seconds, they were discussing art, travel, and charitable foundations. Alessandro watched with growing disbelief. She wasn't surviving the conversation. She was controlling it. More guests gathered. More introductions followed. Standing near the back of the ballroom, another guest watched the scene unfold in silence. Vincent Romano. Unlike most attendees, he wasn't impressed by the growing attention surrounding Emma. He had spent years competing for influence in the same circles as Alessandro. And from the look on his face, he clearly disliked seeing anyone shift the spotlight away from the evening's most powerful figures. Emma never noticed him, but Vincent noticed her. Every time someone approached, Emma adapted effortlessly. She listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, made people feel important, and somehow managed to command attention without ever demanding it. Victor leaned closer to Alessandro. This may be a problem. Alessandro frowned. What do you mean? Victor nodded toward the crowd surrounding Emma. I think your fake wife is becoming the most popular person in the room. Alessandro followed his gaze. For the first time that evening, a strange feeling settled in his chest. One he couldn't quite identify, because the plan had been for Emma to blend into the background. Instead, she was becoming the center of attention. And across the ballroom, a powerful rival watched her with unusual interest. The man's expression suggested he had just recognized something, or someone, and whatever he knew had the potential to change the entire night. Across the ballroom, the mysterious man never took his eyes off Emma. While other guests smiled, laughed, and enjoyed the evening, he simply watched. Patiently, carefully, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. Alessandro noticed it immediately. Years of experience had taught him to recognize danger long before it revealed itself. And something about the man's attention toward Emma felt wrong. Who is he? Emma quietly asked while accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. Alessandro followed her gaze. Richard Hawthorne. Emma's expression remained calm. Should I know that name? Most people in this room do. Richard Hawthorne was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country. Intelligent, influential, and notoriously difficult to read. He had spent years competing with Alessandro on major deals and investments. They rarely trusted each other, and they never underestimated each other. Unfortunately, Richard was now walking directly toward them. The surrounding conversations seemed to soften as nearby guests subtly shifted their attention toward the approaching encounter. Richard stopped a few feet away. His smile was polite. His eyes were not. Alessandro, he said smoothly. Richard. The two men shook hands. A brief exchange. Perfectly professional. Yet everyone could feel the tension beneath it. Then Richard turned toward Emma. For a moment, he simply studied her face. Mrs. Moretti, he said. Emma smiled politely. It's nice to meet you. Likewise. But he didn't move away. Instead, his gaze narrowed slightly. As strange as this sounds, I feel as though I've seen you before. Several nearby guests glanced toward Emma. Alessandro remained expressionless. Emma tilted her head. I don't think we've met. Perhaps not. Richard smiled again. But you remind me of someone. A brief silence followed. The kind of silence that made people uncomfortable. Emma, however, seemed completely unaffected. Hopefully someone pleasant. A few guests laughed. Even Richard appeared surprised by her response. Very pleasant, he admitted. The tension eased slightly. Yet Alessandro noticed something important. Richard was still thinking, still analyzing, still searching his memory. Eventually, another guest pulled Richard into a separate conversation. As soon as he left, Victor appeared beside them. I don't like this. Neither did Alessandro. But before he could respond, another challenge arrived. A group of influential investors approached Emma. One question led to another. Business, education, travel, current events. Topics changed rapidly. Yet Emma handled every discussion with remarkable confidence. She wasn't pretending to be intelligent. She was intelligent. And the more she spoke, the more impressed the guests became. Alessandro watched several people who normally ignored everyone suddenly compete for her attention. One executive laughed louder than necessary. Another repeatedly asked for her opinion. A famous entrepreneur invited her to a private charity event. Every conversation seemed to pull more people toward her. The effect was undeniable. The woman hired to remain invisible was becoming impossible to ignore. For reasons he couldn't explain, Alessandro found himself growing increasingly irritated. Not because she was failing, because she was succeeding too well. Emma eventually noticed his expression. What's wrong? Nothing. She smiled knowingly. You're a terrible liar. I don't lie. Then you're jealous. Alessandro nearly choked on his drink. Jealous? Very. That's ridiculous. Then why do you keep staring at every man who talks to me? Victor suddenly found the ballroom ceiling extremely interesting. Emma laughed softly. Alessandro said nothing. Because for the first time all evening, he wasn't entirely sure she was wrong. Before either could continue, a member of the hotel staff hurried toward them. His face looked unusually nervous. Mr. Moretti, he said quietly, we have a situation. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Alessandro's expression hardened. What happened? The employee glanced toward a private lounge near the back of the ballroom. Someone is asking questions about Mrs. Moretti. Emma's smile disappeared. What kind of questions? The employee swallowed. They're trying to verify who she really is. A cold silence settled between them. Across the room, Richard Hawthorne stood near the lounge entrance, speaking to several influential guests. And from the way he occasionally looked toward Emma, it was obvious one thing had changed. He was no longer curious. He was investigating. And if he uncovered the truth, the fake marriage could collapse before the night was over. The moment Alessandro heard that someone was investigating Emma, his instincts took over. Years of navigating dangerous negotiations and ruthless competitors had taught him one rule above all others. Information was power. And in a room filled with powerful people, the wrong information could destroy everything. Emma remained calm, but Alessandro could see the concern hidden behind her confident expression. What exactly are they saying? He asked the hotel employee. The man lowered his voice. Mr. Hawthorne has been asking staff and guests if anyone knows where Mrs. Moretti came from. He seems convinced there's something unusual about her. The employee quickly excused himself. A heavy silence followed. Emma crossed her arms. So your rival doesn't believe our little marriage story. Alessandro's jaw tightened. He believes something doesn't add up. Is he usually this persistent? Only when he thinks he's close to discovering something valuable. Victor stepped closer. We should be careful. Richard never chases rumors without a reason. Emma looked toward the far side of the ballroom, where Richard was still speaking with several influential guests. I don't understand. What? Alessandro asked. She frowned slightly. Why does he care so much about me? Neither man answered immediately, because it was a good question, and Alessandro wasn't entirely sure he knew the answer. The evening continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Every conversation now carried an undercurrent of tension. Every glance felt more significant. Every smile seemed to hide a question. For the first time since arriving, Emma appeared slightly uncomfortable. Not afraid, just aware that she had become the center of a game she didn't fully understand. A short time later, she stepped onto a quieter terrace overlooking the city skyline. The cool night air provided a welcome escape from the crowded ballroom. To her surprise, Alessandro followed. For several moments, neither spoke. Below them, thousands of city lights stretched toward the horizon. Finally, Emma broke the silence. You live like this every day? Alessandro looked at her. Like what? She gestured toward the ballroom. The pressure. The constant suspicion. People looking for weaknesses. He considered the question. More or less. And you never get tired of it. A faint smile touched his face. Tired doesn't change reality. Emma leaned against the railing. No, but it changes people. For a moment, her words lingered between them. Then she asked a question he hadn't expected. Were you always like this? Alessandro looked away toward the city. Very few people dared ask about his past. Even fewer received answers. But somehow, Emma made the question feel different. No, he admitted quietly. She waited. Not pushing, simply listening. My father built everything from nothing, he continued. He taught me that trust was earned slowly and lost quickly. Emma nodded. Sounds like a difficult lesson. It was. And did it make you happier? Alessandro almost laughed. Happiness wasn't part of the lesson. For the first time that evening, Emma's expression softened. Not with admiration, not with sympathy, with understanding. And strangely, that felt more dangerous than either. Before either could say anything else, the terrace doors opened. Victor appeared. His normally calm face looked troubled. We have another problem. Alessandro immediately straightened. What happened? Victor glanced toward Emma before answering. Richard found someone. The words landed like a stone. Emma frowned. Found who? Victor exhaled slowly. A woman who claims she knows you. Silence. Emma stared at him. I've never met Richard Hawthorne. That may not matter, Victor replied. The woman says she recognizes your name. Alessandro felt the situation tightening around them. Richard was getting closer. Much closer. And whatever connection he believed existed, he was determined to uncover it before the night ended. Then Victor delivered the detail that made the situation even worse. She's on her way here right now. Emma's eyes widened. Because for the first time all evening, she had no idea who was coming. And no idea what that woman might reveal. The woman arrived 10 minutes later. And by then, word had already begun spreading through the ballroom. People sensed drama. They sensed secrets. And powerful people were rarely able to resist either. Standing near the center of the room, Emma felt dozens of curious eyes drifting toward her. Alessandro remained beside her. Calm on the outside, alert on the inside. The mysterious woman was escorted into the ballroom by a hotel attendant. She appeared to be in her late 50s, elegantly dressed, carrying herself with quiet confidence. The moment she entered, Richard Hawthorne stepped forward. A small smile appeared on his face. The smile of a man who believed he was about to prove something. There she is, Richard said. The crowd subtly shifted closer. Emma's pulse quickened. She searched her memory. Nothing. She had never seen this woman before. Not once. The woman looked around the room before her eyes finally landed on Emma. For several long seconds, she simply stared. The silence became almost unbearable. Then she slowly smiled. Oh my goodness. Richard's expression brightened. Several guests exchanged curious glances. The woman walked closer. You look exactly like her. Emma blinked. Like who? The woman laughed softly. Your mother. The entire room seemed to pause. Emma felt the air leave her lungs. My mother. The woman nodded. I knew her years ago. A wave of confusion swept through Emma. Her mother had passed away when she was young. Very few people outside her hometown had known her. What was her name? Emma asked carefully. The woman answered immediately. Margaret Carter. Emma froze. It was correct. The crowd murmured. Richard's confident expression returned. He clearly believed he had uncovered something significant. But the woman wasn't finished. I worked with your mother at a community literacy program many years ago, she explained. She was one of the kindest people I've ever met. Emma listened silently. Memories surfaced. Old photographs. Stories. Fragments of childhood conversations. Everything the woman said sounded genuine. Richard stepped forward. So you recognize her? The woman looked at him, slightly confused. Of course I recognize her family resemblance. Richard waited. The room waited. Then the woman added words nobody expected. But I'm not sure. Why that's important? Several guests looked puzzled. Richard's smile weakened. The woman continued. Margaret often talked about her daughter. She was incredibly proud of her. Emma felt emotion rising unexpectedly in her chest. The ballroom suddenly felt much quieter, much smaller. The woman reached into her purse. I actually kept something all these years. She carefully unfolded an old photograph. Emma accepted it. The image showed her mother standing beside several volunteers. Young, happy, smiling. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The ballroom, the tension, the investigation, all of it. Richard realized the conversation was slipping away from him. What exactly does this prove? One guest asked. The woman looked surprised. Prove? Richard's jaw tightened. The guest continued. You made it sound as though there was some scandal. Several others nodded. Richard suddenly found himself under the same scrutiny he had intended for Emma. The situation was turning against him. Fast. Then something remarkable happened. Emma folded the photograph carefully and looked directly at Richard. Instead of becoming defensive, she smiled. A calm, confident smile. Thank you for helping me receive a memory of my mother I never expected to have tonight. The room fell silent. The grace of her response caught everyone off guard, including Alessandro. Especially Alessandro. The guests immediately warmed to her. Several approached to offer kind words. Others asked about the photograph. Within minutes, the entire atmosphere shifted. Richard's attempt to create suspicion had accomplished the exact opposite. Emma had become even more admired. Not everyone appreciated the change. Across the ballroom, Vincent Romano swirled the ice in his glass while observing the growing crowd around Emma. Several conversations that should have centered on business were now centered on her. His expression tightened. For the first time that evening, he looked less interested in the partnership discussions and more interested in the woman influencing them. Victor leaned toward Alessandro. I think she just won the room. Alessandro watched as guests gathered around her once again. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt something far more dangerous. Pride. Because every time Emma faced a challenge, she somehow emerged stronger. And judging by the expression on Richard Hawthorne's face, the rivalry was far from over. Across the ballroom, Richard quietly picked up his phone and read a newly arrived message. For the first time all night, genuine surprise flashed across his face. Then he looked directly at Emma. Not with curiosity, not with suspicion, but with shock. Because whatever information had just appeared on his screen was something he had never expected to discover. And it was about Emma. Richard Hawthorne stared at the message on his phone. For the first time all evening, the confident businessman looked genuinely unsettled. The change was impossible to miss. Across the ballroom, Alessandro watched carefully as Richard read the screen twice before slipping the phone back into his pocket. Whatever information had just arrived, it had clearly caught him off guard. But before Alessandro could approach him, Emma appeared beside him. The crowd that had surrounded her earlier had finally begun to thin. She looked relieved and surprisingly happy. Are you hiding from your guests? She asked. Alessandro raised an eyebrow. Are you? Emma laughed. Maybe. The sound made him smile despite himself. For a moment, neither thought about Richard, the investigation, or the tension that had filled the evening. They simply enjoyed the rare quiet. A live jazz band began playing near the center of the ballroom. Several couples moved onto the dance floor. Emma glanced toward them, then quickly looked away. Unfortunately for her, Alessandro noticed. You want to dance? Her eyes widened. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Emma shook her head. No chance. Why not? Because this is supposed to be a fake marriage. Alessandro crossed his arms. And fake wives don't dance with dangerous mafia bosses. A rare laugh escaped him. They do if they're trying to look convincing. Emma pointed a finger at him. That was a very manipulative answer. It was also correct. Before she could argue further, he offered his hand. The gesture caught her completely off guard. Around them, several guests were already watching. Waiting. Curious. Emma looked at his hand. Then at him. Finally, she sighed dramatically. Fine. Alessandro led her onto the dance floor. The reaction was immediate. Guests smiled. Conversations paused. Even Richard Hawthorne glanced in their direction. Because for the first time all evening, the couple looked less like strangers playing a role and more like two people who genuinely enjoyed being together. As the music continued, Emma relaxed. The nervousness disappeared. The tension faded. Soon they were talking quietly between songs. About childhood memories. Favorite places. Embarrassing mistakes. Simple things. Normal things. Things neither of them discussed with most people. At one point Emma looked up and realized Alessandro was actually listening. Not scanning the room. Not checking his phone. Listening. The realization warmed her unexpectedly. "You know," she said softly, "you're very different from what people think." Alessandro looked down at her. "Is that good or bad?" "I haven't decided yet." His smile returned. And once again Emma found herself staring a little longer than she intended. Unfortunately, they weren't the only people noticing. Across the ballroom, several influential guests had begun approaching Victor. Questions were spreading. Not suspicious questions. Interested ones. Who was Emma Carter? How had Alessandro met her? Was the marriage recent? One investor even joked that Alessandro looked happier tonight than he had in years. Victor found the comments increasingly amusing. Meanwhile, Richard finally approached them. This time there was no challenge in his voice. No investigation. No hidden agenda. Only curiosity. "You've created quite an impression tonight, Miss Carter." Emma smiled politely. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." Richard glanced toward Alessandro. "Although I suspect Mr. Moretti may not be thrilled that you're receiving more attention than he is." Emma laughed. Alessandro did not deny it, which made Richard laugh as well. For the first time that evening, the rivalry between the two powerful men seemed to disappear. Then, Richard's expression became thoughtful. "I'll give you one piece of advice." Emma tilted her head. "What is it?" Richard looked directly at her. "Don't underestimate the effect you've had on him." The words landed harder than anyone expected, especially Alessandro. A brief silence followed. Emma suddenly found herself unable to look away from him. And for a moment, the fake marriage felt dangerously real. Then Victor hurried toward them once again. This time his expression wasn't worried. It was surprised. "Alessandro, what happened?" Victor lowered his voice. "You need to see this." "What is it?" Victor glanced between Alessandro and Emma, then smiled. "Someone just offered your company the biggest partnership deal of the year." Alessandro frowned, and Victor's grin widened. "They said the reason they signed was because they met Emma tonight." The room seemed to stop, because neither Alessandro nor Emma had expected that the woman hired to play a role for one evening would become the reason a life-changing opportunity had just landed in his hands. The biggest partnership deal of the year. Those words followed Alessandro long after Victor delivered the news. For nearly a decade, he had been pursuing opportunities like this one. The agreement would expand his business influence internationally, strengthen several major investments, and silence many of the rivals who had questioned his position. And somehow, it had happened because of Emma, the woman he had hired for a single evening, the woman who wasn't supposed to matter. Across the ballroom, the news spread quickly among the guests. Congratulations arrived from every direction. Investors wanted meetings. Executives wanted introductions. Business leaders suddenly seemed eager to strengthen their relationships with Alessandro. Victor could barely keep up. Yet through all the excitement, Alessandro found himself looking for only one person. Emma. He spotted her near the terrace doors speaking with an elderly woman from one of the charitable foundations represented at the event. She wasn't discussing contracts, or investments, or influence. She was listening to a story about helping underprivileged children receive scholarships. And she looked genuinely interested. Not because anyone important was watching, because she cared. The realization stayed with Alessandro. Most people wanted something from powerful men. Money, status, connections. Emma never had. And that made her different. Dangerously different. A short while later, the organizers invited several key guests onto a small stage to celebrate the evening's major announcements. To Alessandro's surprise, one of the investors publicly thanked Emma for her insight and charm. The ballroom erupted in applause. Emma looked shocked. Alessandro looked proud. Unfortunately, not everyone was pleased. Standing near the back of the room was Vincent Romano, a wealthy businessman whose company had been competing for the same partnership. The deal had slipped through his fingers, and he clearly blamed Emma. As guests continued celebrating, Vincent approached her. At first his smile appeared friendly, but Alessandro noticed the tension immediately. "You've had quite a night," Vincent said. Emma nodded politely. "It's been memorable." "I imagine it has." His tone carried a subtle edge, one that most people might miss. Emma didn't. Neither did Alessandro. Vincent glanced around the room. "It's amazing how quickly one person can influence important decisions." Emma remained calm. "I don't think I influenced anything." "Really?" His smile tightened, because several people seemed convinced otherwise. The conversation drew a few curious glances. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make Alessandro start moving toward them. Before he arrived, Vincent asked one final question. What exactly is your experience in international business? The implication was obvious. You don't belong here. Several nearby guests heard it. A few looked uncomfortable. The room seemed to pause, waiting, watching, expecting Emma to become embarrassed. Instead, she smiled. The same calm, confident smile that had carried her through the entire evening. I don't have decades of experience in international business. Vincent's expression brightened slightly. But I do have experience understanding people. The smile disappeared. Emma continued. And tonight, every successful person I've met has shared one thing in common. Vincent folded his arms. What is that? They listen. Silence. Several guests exchanged looks. Emma's voice remained gentle. Not because they know everything. Because they know they can always learn something new. The words landed perfectly. Not aggressive. Not insulting. Simply true. A few people nodded. Others smiled. Vincent suddenly found himself standing alone. The moment belonged to Emma. Again. And he knew it. Without another word, he walked away. The tension vanished almost instantly. Applause began from somewhere in the crowd. Then more joined. Even Richard Hawthorne laughed. She's undefeated tonight. The guests agreed. Alessandro finally reached Emma's side. You handled that well. Emma smiled. You sound surprised. I am. She laughed softly. You should stop underestimating me. I stopped doing that hours ago. For a moment, neither looked away. The ballroom around them seemed to disappear. The noise faded. The conversations blurred into the background. And suddenly, the reality neither wanted to acknowledge became impossible to ignore. This was no longer about a contract. No longer about a fake marriage. No longer about a single dinner. Something real had started growing between them. Something neither had planned. Then Victor appeared one final time. Unlike earlier, he wasn't carrying bad news. In fact, he looked amused. What now? Alessandro asked. Victor grinned. The event organizers just announced the closing ceremony. Emma smiled. That sounds harmless. Victor chuckled. Normally, yes. The smile on his face widened. But there's one tradition. Alessandro immediately narrowed his eyes. What tradition? Victor looked directly at both of them. The couple voted most memorable by the guests is invited on stage for the final dance. Emma's eyes widened. Alessandro groaned. Victor laughed, then delivered the final detail. You two won by a landslide. And judging by the hundreds of guests already turning toward them, there was absolutely no way to escape it. There was no escape. The moment the organizers announced that Alessandro and Emma had been voted the evening's most memorable couple, the ballroom erupted into applause. Hundreds of eyes turned toward them. Some guests cheered. Others laughed. Several began chanting for them to go on stage. Emma looked horrified. Alessandro looked even worse. Victor, meanwhile, was enjoying every second of it. This is your fault, Alessandro muttered. My fault, Victor replied. I didn't spend the entire night looking at her like she hung the moon. Emma nearly choked trying not to laugh. Alessandro shot Victor a warning look. It had no effect whatsoever. The applause grew louder. The event host stepped forward with a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome tonight's favorite couple. The crowd cheered again. Emma leaned closer to Alessandro. Can we run? No. Hide? No. Pretend we didn't hear them? Definitely no. She sighed dramatically. You're not very helpful. Neither are you. Despite their protests, they were soon escorted onto the stage. The ballroom stretched before them like a sea of smiling faces. Emma suddenly felt nervous for the first time all evening. Not because of the crowd. Because everything was beginning to feel too real. The host grinned. Before the final dance, we have one question. Alessandro immediately disliked where this was going. The audience loved it. The host turned toward Emma. What is the first thing you noticed about your husband? Laughter rippled through the room. Emma looked at Alessandro, then smiled. Honestly, the audience leaned forward. He looked like someone who hadn't relaxed in about 10 years. The room exploded with laughter. Even Alessandro laughed. The host pointed at him. And what about you, Mr. Moretti? Alessandro glanced toward Emma. For a moment, his usual confidence disappeared. Then he answered truthfully. She wasn't afraid of me. The room grew unexpectedly quiet, because everyone could hear the sincerity in his voice. Emma felt her heart skip. The host smiled knowingly. I think everyone in this room noticed that. Applause followed. Then the music began. Soft, elegant, beautiful. The final dance of the evening. Alessandro offered his hand. This time Emma. didn't hesitate. As they moved across the dance floor, the crowd gradually faded into the background. Neither cared who was watching anymore. The evening that had begun as a performance no longer felt like one. Emma looked up at him. Do you realize how ridiculous this is? What part? We met because you needed a fake wife. A smile touched his face. That's true. And now we're dancing in front of half the city's elite. Also true. Emma laughed. Neither of us planned this. No. His voice softened. We didn't. For a moment, neither spoke. The music continued. The lights reflected across the ballroom. And somewhere between one step and the next, both realized they were thinking the same thing. Neither wanted the night to end. When the dance finally ended, the applause lasted nearly a full minute. Guests rose from their seats. Several people even wiped away tears. The atmosphere was warm, celebratory, perfect. Then the chairman of the partnership group stepped onto the stage. The room immediately quieted. He smiled at Alessandro. Tonight, we witnessed something remarkable. The audience listened. Business relationships are built on trust. He turned toward Emma. And sometimes trust is revealed by the people who stand beside us. The chairman then announced that the partnership agreement would officially move forward immediately. The ballroom erupted again. It was the final victory of the evening. A victory nobody had expected when the night began. Especially not Emma. As guests started preparing to leave, the chairman approached her privately. There is something you should know. Emma looked surprised. What is it? The elderly man smiled warmly. The scholarship foundation your mother once supported is expanding nationally next year. Emma blinked. Really? He nodded. We've been searching for someone to serve as a public ambassador. She immediately shook her head. I'm not qualified. The chairman smiled. I disagree. Before she could respond, he handed her a business card. Think about it. Then he walked away. Emma stared at the card in her hand. For the first time, she realized that tonight hadn't only changed Alessandro's future. It might have changed hers too. Across the room, Alessandro watched her. And something became clear. The confident woman who walked into his life a few days ago wasn't simply passing through it anymore. She was becoming part of it. The only question was whether either of them would finally admit what had been growing between them all night. And with the event ending, there was only one chance left to say what truly mattered. The event was over. The music had faded. The guests were leaving. One by one, the powerful men and women who had filled the ballroom disappeared into the night. A few hours earlier, Alessandro Moretti had arrived with a carefully crafted plan. Hire a fake wife. Survive an important dinner. Protect a business deal. Then move on. Simple. Controlled. Predictable. Instead, nothing had gone according to plan. And for the first time in years, he was grateful for it. Across the ballroom, Emma stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. In her hand was the business card from the chairman of the Scholarship Foundation. The lights of the city sparkled below. For a moment, she simply stood there, reflecting on everything that had happened. The fake marriage, the unexpected friendships, the opportunity from the foundation, the feeling that somehow her life had shifted direction in a single evening. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around. She already knew who it was. Everyone's gone, Emma said softly. Almost everyone. She smiled. You're still here. So are you. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The comfortable silence felt surprisingly natural. Emma finally turned toward him. You know, when you offered me this arrangement, I thought it would be the strangest night of my life. Alessandro nodded. Reasonable assumption. She laughed. But somehow it became one of the best. The honesty of her answer caught him off guard. Not because he doubted her. Because he felt exactly the same way. Emma looked around the nearly empty ballroom. I guess this is where we say goodbye. The words landed harder than Alessandro expected, because hearing them made something painfully clear. He didn't want her to leave. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not at all. Instead of answering immediately, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Emma watched curiously. Alessandro removed a folded document. The original agreement. The contract that had brought them together. Emma recognized it instantly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Alessandro looked down at the pages, looked back at her, and slowly tore the contract in half. Emma's eyes widened. The ballroom suddenly felt very quiet. Alessandro dropped the torn pieces onto a nearby table. I don't need this anymore. His voice was calm, honest, real. The only reason I asked you to stay was because of a contract. He took a step closer. If you stay now. His gaze never left hers. I want it to be because you choose to. For a moment, Emma simply stared at him. This was not the man she had met a few days ago. The man who measured every conversation. The man who controlled every situation. The man who always seemed impossible to read. That version of Alessandro Moretti was gone. Standing in front of her now was someone willing to risk hearing the answer he feared most. Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just important. Alessandro let out a quiet breath. There is something else you should know. Emma's heart skipped. What? A faint smile touched his face. I knew this dinner was important. She nodded. So did everyone else. No. He shook his head. You don't understand. His eyes held hers. The partnership mattered. The investors mattered. The business mattered. He paused. But halfway through the evening, I stopped caring whether the deal happened. Emma stared at him. Because she immediately knew he was telling the truth. Alessandro glanced toward the ballroom where the final members of the staff were cleaning up. When I couldn't find you in the crowd, I looked for you. A small smile appeared on Emma's face. I noticed. When someone else had your attention, I hated it. Emma laughed softly. I definitely noticed that. His smile faded into something more serious. I've spent years building a life where nothing could surprise me. He took another step closer. Then you walked into it. The words landed with more force than a long speech ever could. For several seconds, Emma couldn't find an answer. Not because she didn't have one. Because she had felt the same thing. Since the moment she realized she kept searching for him too. Finally, she looked down at the torn pieces of the contract. Then back at Alessandro. A slow smile appeared. Good. Alessandro blinked. Good. She nodded. Because I was getting tired of being your fake wife. A rare look of confusion crossed his face. Emma stepped closer. Close enough that neither needed to raise their voice. I'd rather be your real one. For the first time all evening, Alessandro was completely speechless. And judging by Emma's smile, she intended to enjoy every second of it. A moment later, he laughed. A genuine laugh. The kind few people had ever heard. Emma joined him. The tension that had followed them throughout the evening finally disappeared. Outside the windows, the first light of dawn began to spread across the horizon. A new day. A new beginning. Emma glanced at the business card still resting in her hand. The foundation opportunity could change my future. It could. And you're really okay with that? Alessandro smiled. Without hesitation. Emma, if tonight proved anything, it's that you're capable of doing far more than you realize. The sincerity in his voice touched her. What if it takes me somewhere unexpected? His smile widened. Then I'll be looking forward to the journey. For a moment, neither looked away. The contract was gone. The performance was over. There were no more rules. No more roles to play. Only two people standing at the beginning of something real. Emma slipped her hand into his. This time, neither had any reason to let go. As the sun rose over the city skyline, both understood the same thing. The fake marriage had ended. But the love story neither of them expected had only just begun.